Dan Pearson, Americans for Prosperity. I'm curious about leverage. The United States, it seems to me, has done a really good job of getting the interest of other WTO members and creating among some of them a concern and a desire to fix things. Does the United States have maximum leverage now, or will it have more leverage after December 10, after the process stops? I mean, the question is, when does the United States put down a marker saying, this is what we want?
My own view would be, I think they have maximum leverage between now and December 10th. Not to suggest that everything would be worked out by December 10th, but I do think that unless you see movement, certainly soon, I think the U.S. loses leverage. Why? Because the rest of the world will move on either to the Article 25 arbitration process or again to these pacts among countries not to appeal certain decisions, both of which are basically decisions that leave the United States out. And all that will have been done is the United States will have raised tremendous ire on the part of all the other members of the WTO that perceive that, yes, they may agree with some of the substantive concerns of the United States, but that this idea that the United States is going to block the rest of the world from having a two-stage process to which the rules very clearly entitle the rest of the world to have an appellate body, and the United States is perceived as not engaging in the solution. I think in the end of the day, the U.S. will have squandered the leverage that it has if it doesn't start moving soon toward an actual solution to this problem. I mean, to at least showing that they are prepared to move enough to do a couple of things. One is to allow the existing members of the appellate body to stay on and complete the pending appeals, because there are now 13 appeals pending. And so the question comes, again, if you take what the United States is saying, the presumption is all 13 of those die on December 10th because the United States objects to the notion that you can hold over and finish an appeal that started unless you can complete it by December 10th. We will not get these 13 appeals completed by December 10th. So again, at a bare minimum, I think the U.S. has got to be very clear that we are unlocking the steps that it would take to allow at least the pending appeals to be completed. And secondly, that they're going to start engaging and at least looking for 6 new members around the world. This is not going to be a quick process to find 6 really good people across the globe to start filling these seats. At least start that looking process. And at the same time, think about what you can do on the ongoing basis. I think if there's continued no, and we don't want to discuss any specifics, I think the U.S. loses its leverage.
Just to play contrarian on that, first with regard to the pending appeals, if you look at what the U.S. has done on recent DSB meetings, while they have raised the concern that the appellate body decision, in their view, is invalid because it contained members on the division whose term had expired, they have not blocked adoption of those panel reports where they are not a member. So I would say that you might see a split depending on who's parties to which appeals in terms of the United States. In terms of leverage, it depends what happens, right? What kind of chaos there is, what kind of concern there is, and what kinds of big issues end up not being appealed or not being capable of appeal because of the lack. And so I think that there continues to be leverage. That doesn't mean that you don't have consequences in terms of your relationships with trading partners, but at least for this administration, that does not appear to be the primary concern.
I think in terms of the question of whether there should be a solution before or after December, at this point it's somewhat academic because there's very little prospect in the amount of time that's left. There is perhaps time to address the concern that Jennifer had raised with regard to pending cases. It would be a fairly simple matter to, in effect, give the U.S. a win, and the U.S. to take a win, if they were to simply have the dispute settlement body authorize the existing members to continue to serve. If they wish to continue to serve, because one of them is indicating may not. So there's that element of it. But after December 11th, because I think we're inevitably going to be in that situation, the question is how quickly, the U.S. should be engaging. And, there really is a risk that the longer that things last, the more that the situation becomes a new normal. I suppose it's good that members will be figuring out ways to keep things going. They'll be, whether it's this this arbitration process that the EU is working on with Canada and others, or whether it's this agreement process not to do appeals. But to the extent that that becomes the new normal and the pressure is off to get a solution, then that will be problematic in finding a solution that's not in the U.S. interest.
All right, next question, somebody way in the back there. The guy with the glasses on the right.
Thank you. I'm Jacob Nelson from Steptoe & Johnson. I have a question about these sort of two alternative DSB proposals which we've talked about today. My kind of instinct on this is that the insights that you need in order to predict whether or not these things will be successful are the sort of insights that you get from knowing these institutions and the people in them very well. And we're lucky enough to have all of you who know those institutions and those people very well. So my question is just really to all of you, especially Professor Hillman, who's been a member of the Appellate Body, is how likely do you think that either of these two prospective solutions will be to work? Do you think that parties will, should they sort of agree ahead of time that they won't appeal a given case, and then it goes in a way that they don't think it was going to go at the outset? Will they actually be faithful to that, or on the sort of EU-Canada approach, if they kind of have this parallel appellate body and that body rules in a way which is contrary to the interest of a certain party in that dispute? Will they actually respect that, given that it's not, official, whatever that means? What are your thoughts on how likely either of these things will be to succeed and to be respected by the various parties?
Well, again, it's a good question. I think inherent in your question is it's hard to know at this point. I mean, part of the difficulty with the arbitration, the good and the bad of the thinking of the Article 25 arbitration is it's already in the rules of the DSU. So neither the United States nor any other party can block the setup of an arbitration system because the rules already provide for it. The downside of the arbitration is twofold. One is it's case by case, and it requires the consent of both parties to engage in the arbitration itself. So again, there is no way to hold anyone to doing it if they don't agree to do so. And the second part of it really gets to your question is that unlike appellate body reports, which are formally adopted by the dispute settlement body, and that as a result of that formal adoption by the dispute settlement body, you have 164 countries as part of the dispute settlement body writing heard over compliance. So again, you can return again and again to the dispute settlement body and presumably get the naming, shaming, pressure factor from all of the members of the DSB to try to encourage compliance. That does not happen with an arbitration report. It is not formally adopted by the DSB. So again, it leaves the parties as the ones that have to ride herd, if you will, over compliance only as between the two of them. Yes, it can be attached, it can be sent to the DSB for notice, but there's not a formal adoption of the report. So whether countries would agree to arbitrate and then not agree to adhere to the arbitration decision, I think it's hard to say, but is certainly a legal possibility. Similarly, again, if there were to be an agreement in advance, which we've already seen one of them, an agreement in advance, whatever comes of the panel, we will not appeal. Again, there's no way to actually hold parties to that because everybody still has the right under the WTO rules to file a notice of appeal. And again, after December 11th, filing the notice of appeal is the equivalent of blocking the panel report. And I think everybody knows that. And because everybody knows it, my hope is that countries will be restrained, will not do that, will not file lots of notices of appeal that effectively block. But it's too early to know whether they really will do that.
And I just wanted to underscore, Jennifer's last last point there, which is that while there's two solutions out there, they're not the only approaches members can take, because they are going to require the litigants in an individual case to choose. And if they don't choose to take either of those options, but merely to accept the possibility of effectively blocking the panel report by appealing, then those solutions are going to fall short, because they're not agreed options by all the members. They're just ad hoc, case by case.
Another question? Paul?
Paul Rosenthal, Kelly Dry Moore. What does the Walker Principle say about the special provisions for appeals of dumping cases, Article 17.6, and what are the Europeans saying about that? They did agree to it during the Uruguay round, but I don't know whether they believe it or want to have it applied. But what's your view on all that?
Just quickly on what's in the Walker Principles, it reaffirms Article 17.6. That doesn't seem to go very far beyond that.
Yeah, I think from the United States perspective, my read of what Dennis Shea had to say, Ambassador Shea had to say at the last DSB meeting was, this is basically meaningless. It doesn't get the correction as to what's going on. It is an effort, as Jennifer would say, to restate and reemphasize the importance that this principle should apply, but obviously it hasn't. The appellate body would say that they have given weight to the provision. They simply have never used it in a way that the United States would view as consistent with its language.
I don't know what the European Union has said about this specific provision. What I will say is I'm not going to disagree with either Bruce or Terry in terms of what the words say, but part of it is, again, what is the message that's being sent by the fact that this exact provision is being highlighted in these Walker Principles, and to me, the effort here is unequivocal to send a clear message that the members are not happy with the current interpretation of 17.6.2, and the appellate body better take notice that this was one of the very few specific provisions that was highlighted in these Walker Principles with respect to the standard of review. Again, hard to know where exactly this comes out, but certainly the door has been open for work on this specific issue of the standard of review in 17.6.2.
Okay, next question.
Thank you, terrific panel. Jean-François Wattin with MEDEF, the French business. I have two questions. One to Jennifer. It's rather specific on your third element. Isn't there a danger that you create actually a super appellate body? And how do you think that people outside the US maybe would react to the idea of having private trade lawyers sit with the heads of the various bodies of the WTO? And my broader question is, does the US really want a solution? Or, last week, Chairman Rich of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee said, hey, we are the 800-pound gorilla. So does the 800-pound gorilla need the rule of law? Or does he dream about going back to the good old days of GATT, where you could block a panel, not respect the conclusions of the panel?
So maybe I'll just take the specific one, because my response to your second question comes back to my you don't know what you got till it's gone starting point. On this commission, yes, there's however you design this or whatever you do, there is a concern. And so my hope had been to try to figure out a way to structure it so that the primary role of this commission was to do this audit on an annual basis. So it wasn't really intending to be individual case by case by case, every single case. So it was not an intent to just create a supra appellate body that would do that. And the hope would be that the rare individual cases would fall into that sort of extraordinary challenge sort of notion, that it really was something that was clearly out of bounds. But you're right, it would be important to structure it in a way and to write the rules for it in a way that made it clear that its primary role was this kind of annual audit, not a case-by-case, for each individual case review process. The idea behind adding lawyers, and again, I'm certainly open to thinking about it, so I would give you further suggestions. The concern I would have is if you choose just the heads of the main committees, which I think is important, because the idea behind this commission is to create some notion of, if you will, political, of member oversight to some degree. The chances are high that none of those particular persons are lawyers, and none of them have particular expertise with sort of the legal procedures or the specifics of how appeals work. So I do think you do need some way to bring on board some genuine trade law expertise, not to have that be predominant, but to have there be at least some level of legal expertise sitting as equivalent members of this commission.
Fair enough.
I'll take a shot at your second broader question. I think if you take a look at the U.S. action in Geneva in this administration, the answer is that the administration is as committed to the WTO as prior administrations, and that includes their actions in the dispute settlement system. They actively participate in all the panels of appeals that involve their products. They have done, as Jennifer and Bruce and others have said, a really extraordinary job of laying out what their concerns are and the history of the concerns and the deviations from what was agreed back in '95. So whether there may be members of the administration who are willing to push the envelope to get reforms, and if that means a period of time in which there is uncertainty in terms of how disputes are resolved, that may be true, but I don't think that there's any abandonment of the basic commitment to the WTO or its basic structure.
One last question. Hi, Lila Foss from Toyota. I was wondering if when the new European Commission enters office on December 1st, if that might provide an opportunity for a breakthrough and getting something done, and just how if the appellate body is no longer functioning, how that could affect a decision for the EU case against Boeing on aircraft subsidies, and just if there is no resolution to this appellate body, are we facing a Super 301 type of world, where individual countries take it to their own hands to determine if another country has unfair trade practices and goes it alone?
I'll address just the very last part of that comment. If you take a look at what Europe and Canada and Mexico and others did in the 232 cases, they took the law into their own hands outside of the WTO process by creating the fabrication that a safeguard action was what was done under Section 232, which clearly isn't there. So we're already at a point where you have a substantial breakdown in terms of many major countries honoring the WTO rules. At least in the United States case, the 232 was under a statute that deals with national security. There was a provision, there was an investigation, there were findings, there were actions that were consistent. Trading partners who are unhappy with that obviously have a right to take a challenge to the WTO, and members did that. But you have a huge number of members who created a subterfuge for retaliating, and that obviously is not contemplated. Whether the new commission will make a difference in terms of this particular issue on the appellate body, my guess is no. DG Trade's litigators are pretty well entrenched and been there for decades, and I think they control the basic discourse that comes out of Brussels on that issue.
I'm gonna just disagree on that. I actually am very hopeful that the new European Commission actually is taking a little bit of a different view, because I think what you've heard, and there's no question that you do hear it from some of the EU litigators, this perception that what we really want is to turn the appellate body into the European Court of Justice, etc. There's clearly some element of those that are doing the litigation on behalf of the European Union that I think have that view. I do not believe that is the political view of the Commission writ large, and I do not believe it is the view of the incoming Commission. In other words, I think they are more willing to say that part of the reason, part of the way in which we get to a consensus on this is because I think Europe does not monolithically want the appellate body to be the European Court of Justice. And I think the European Commission, and particularly the new Commission, I think is going to be more able to say, we agree that the appellate body needs to be brought back into these clear lanes in terms of what were their roles. I actually am optimistic that the new Commission is on the appellate body front, I think, may be able to move farther. On the broader issue of whether Europe is generally willing to take more aggressive action in response to U.S. considered aggressive action, I think the question is no doubt yes. I mean, that's what they're putting in place now, is a better ability to do the functional equivalent of 301 and immediate retaliatory tariffs. So again, I think, and the two go hand in hand. I mean, I think the perception is if there is not a rules-based system at the WTO, then we're going to have to make sure that we are as equally armed as the United States is to engage in unilateral tit-for-tat behavior. So I think on the broader question, there's no doubt that that's the direction that Europe is moving in, is at least to arm itself for a world in which we're not operating under a rules-based system.
Give Bruce the last word here.
Yeah, and therein lies the risk, because even if the new Commission is more inclined to accommodate or to try to reach a solution here, this dynamic that is in place as a result of the Boeing case could in the end undermine it very quickly. The window for positive movement might be shorter than we'd like, and the EU in pursuing that latter approach might be cutting off the possibility for making progress. The dynamic, it's going to have to be a two-way dynamic. There will have to be signals given on both sides that there can be progress, so that the less constructive approaches will be avoided, because those could really dig in the problem on a longer-term basis.
Thank you. Thank you to our panel. I think we could have probably gone on for a good bit longer. This is a conversation that we've been having in WITA for several years, and I hopefully will be able to come to some resolution soon. Thanks to our panel. Jennifer, you inspired us at WITA. We're going to work on a Spotify playlist for the WTO. The song you were referencing is Big Yellow Taxi. We can get the soundtrack from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I think we can work on that. I thought The Law and the Law won. Heart of Glass, I think, would be appropriate. Another one, Bites the Dust. Beast of Burden, Free Falling. Highway to Hell might work. We can also add things like We're Gonna Be Friends, Under Pressure, The Show Must Go On, Message in a Bottle, Stay, Love Runs Out, Never Gonna Give You Up. I think there's a lot we can do with this. We might even include a Spotify playlist in the Friday Focus, so keep an eye on your email inbox for that. With that, thanks to our panel, thanks to all of you for joining us.